This is Van Vance. You're listening to the Proffitt Report Podcast with Doug Proffitt.
I'm a snow lover. Hey, I just have to admit it. But saying that on the air over the years in Louisville is like saying you're a UK or U of L fan or revealing which political party you prefer. But I can't help it. I grew up at a great time in Louisville during the blizzard of 1978 and when WHAS TV started playing Bellavia, that song, for the first time. Bellavia was written and performed by Chuck Mangione. It's our snow closing music. We cherish it here. We love keeping the tradition alive. But whose decision was it to pick Bellavia here at the station? For 41 years, pretty much interrupted at WHAS, and there's something about Bellavia. It's not just a song. It entered sort of the psychic of people around Kentuckiana, and I know that might sound weird, but I'm just going to read a few messages and notes that I pulled off my account the other day. This is over maybe the last just 5 years from people when they hear that music even to this day. I was just listening to Doug Proffitt on the news, wondering when they started playing the closing music. It was like he read my mind and announces 40 years ago. Seems like they played that when I was a kid. This is John Wright. I loved hearing that song when I was a kid because I knew a snow day was coming. Bobby Joe Hack Duvall. I love that music. Reminds me of when I went to school. Great memories. Dalonia. I live in Wisconsin. I was watching a live stream of WHAS. The closings came on and it made me so homesick. And Michelle Sullivan, that song brings back memories of watching the news and all the school names on the screen. Love hearing it again. And thanks to whoever started playing it at WHAS. What a tradition. Well, whoever started playing it is sitting right here with me, Jerry Lloyd.
How you doing, Doug?
I'm so glad to do this. You started at WHAS in 1966 and retired in 1998. You were a director of broadcasts. So it's just a fate that this happened. I know that this song, you've probably heard Bellavia how many times in your life?
Oh, a zillion times. I know it almost measure by now.
So in 1970s, we were getting a lot of snow, and I remember watching WHAS as a kid. The snow music you all would play was pretty much the same that WHAS radio would play. First of all,
yes, it was.
Why did you have to run snow music? What was it about the newscast that required a tune?
Well, as you said, in the 70s, we had so much snow and there were so many closings of both businesses and schools, and we wanted to present all those closings on the newscast. And we started out with just supering a few names at a time, but it got to the point where there were literally hundreds of schools and businesses that we had to identify.
Because the snows got so bad.
Certainly. And so I had to come up with some way of some musical representation that could run under the crawl.
But technically at the time, the newscasts were different because right now, as you know, the closings are always on the bottom of the screen. But back then, you all had to pause and say, here is a list of the closings, and you rolled them up the screen.
The technique was entirely different then, and we didn't have all the fancy electronics that you have now. So we did what was called a crawl, which was a typed message that rolled across the screen, bottom to top, and we would put hundreds of those names on this crawl, and we would, announcer would say, in the school closings for tomorrow, and we'd roll some music and play the crawl.
So then comes this decision to set the stage for people to understand how our building is where you're sitting now. The company was family-owned. WHAS TV and radio were right here in the same building. TV news was around the corner from radio, and things sort of intermixed. The personalities would do radio stuff, and the music was the same. You were using the same cut.
I was working from the WHAS Music Library, and Bellavia came from that library. This was in 1978. In 1977, Chuck Mangione recorded Bellavia. He's the same person, if you've ever watched on CBS, The Young and the Restless TV show, he also created the theme for that song, Nadia's theme, and he was a very popular jazz musician at that time. He was working at the Eastman Jazz Center in New York or whatever.
And we were running some of his earlier 70s music in the newscast. It was bumper music before you'd go to break. And so so the blizzard of 78 comes along. Chuck Taylor's the meteorologist. Jim Mitchell's the news anchor. We still have some of the old film, the old newscasts here where he says, and now basically all Louisville's closed. Here's a list of the closings. When was the moment that you decided to quit using the WHAS radio music and you go down to the library and you pick this song? What was it about it that struck you?
Well, I had studied a lot of psychology in college. I knew the term referring to people remembering events in their lives based on music or some other key event. So I wanted a piece of music that when people heard that music, they said in their head, school closings are coming, school closings coming. So I looked for a piece of music that A, was upbeat, B, was fairly long, C, was very easily recognizable, and Bellavia was an obvious choice. It was 6.5 minutes long. Chuck had done 3 or 4 versions of it, and there was a point about 45 seconds into the music was ideal upbeat for us to put the crawl over. So we started using it in January of 78, and it kept snowing and snowing and snowing in January 78. I think even the river froze over that year. Jim Mitchell was here, as you said. Chuck Taylor was here, and we were inundated with all the difficulties that any TV station has of handling a major snow in a major city like Louisville was. The interstate was closed part of the time. Spaghetti Junction was closed. I remember one night we had Jim Mitchell standing in Spaghetti Junction. We opened the newscast. Jim says something to the effect, "Good evening. Louisville is closed." And the camera pans over to the interstate. You see absolutely nothing. I mean, it was snow, and it snowed for days and days and days. And all the crew from here at the station were living at the Galt House at that time because we couldn't go home. Chuck Taylor was there, Dave Conrad, myself, and a lot of the production people from the station. So we were hanging out at the Galt House. And we were riding back and forth in Jim Mitchell's brand new car. He had come here from Buffalo, New York, and he had a new BMW. Just had it like for days before he moved here. So we were riding back and forth from station to the Galt House in his car all the time. His car took a real beating that winter.
But it probably did well in the snow.
Oh, it did fine.
Well, Jerry, I love this story because when the winter storm of 94 hit, we all stayed at the Sealback because we could walk. I wondered where you guys stayed. But back to the moment where you decided to go with Bellavia. I thought one of the myths in the building is that you needed a longer cut because the snowfalls were so bad.
Sure.
But had you listened to Bellavia, like on the radio or whatever, did you admire the song? What made you reach for that?
I was a real fan of Chuck Mangione's. I knew a lot of his previous music. He had a cut called Feels So Good that came out about the same time. He was working for A&M Records in California, doing a lot of jazz with them, and he was performing at all the important jazz locations around the country then. He had done a big routine in Carnegie Hall. He had done one in Hollywood Bowl. So I knew who Chuck Mangione was. And yes, I had heard the music before, sometime previous to that, and it was sort of in the back of my mind. And when we started looking around for something, it kind of fit the definition I defined before about length and upbeat music, something that would be easily recognizable. And I hoped it would be something that people would connect us with snow and school closings. So to me, it was a natural piece of music.
So you were looking for an iconic piece, too. You weren't just going for the length and you said, hey, this thing's long.
Oh, absolutely. I could have gone to the music library and looked at in the card catalog for long jazz music and probably found something we had gotten from BMI or one of the services at the time. But I wanted something that perhaps people had heard. People remember this is the late 70s, and that kind of music was very, very popular at that time. And I knew we had a broad audience age-wise. I wanted something that people who like jazz would enjoy, and something that was going to be very recognizable.
Were you looking for a music that said snowfall? I mean, because a lot of people tell me in their letters, when they hear that song, they think of snow falling.
Absolutely. That was one of if you were to go to a computer now and look for taglines, tag IDs for a piece of music, you would probably find snowfall as one of the taglines, or winter or cold. It wasn't set up that way. Computers weren't set up that way to track all the music for us. But I didn't want to use a piece of music we had bought from BMI, and somebody in town might have that same music in their library.
A competitor.
Sure.
So when you make the decision as the director, because the way news operations and TV stations work, there's general managers, news directors, there's producers. Everybody likes to have their little hand in the say, and it's a collaborative effort. Always was back then,
certainly.
And it is now. Did you tell anybody you were going to look? I'm switching. I'm breaking ranks from the WHAS radio theme, whatever that was, and I'm going to go brand new on this newscast. Did you have to get it approved?
I had to get the concept approved by the general manager. I went to the news director and told him what I wanted to do, because remember, this was slowing a newscast down tremendously from a creative standpoint, to have to roll that piece of video that most people didn't care about. I mean, they wanted to find out about one school. They didn't care about the rest of it. So we sort of had to keep them hooked into the show and not tune out and go to that station down the street that's still here, I guess. So it was very important that piece of music be something that wasn't going to be a tune-out.
Did you have to play it for all of them?
Oh, I played it for the general manager. I played it for Jim Mitchell. Bob Morse was the news director here at that time, sort of the wonderkind of broadcast news at that time here. And yeah, Bob said, great, let's use it. So I got it dubbed off.
Did anybody resist it?
Oh, yes.
I mean, did anybody in the building say no?
Everybody is a music expert. Everybody has their own likes in music. You and I probably like different music now. And I said, well, give it a chance. Let's run it 2 weeks and see if we get any feedback from the audience on it.
Okay.
We don't want to do that. Just give me a chance.
And
we ran it.
Who gave it the final okay then to go run with it?
Bob Morse.
So they left it at the news director level?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember when you first played it? Was it actually during the blizzard or before the blizzard of 78?
We started it before the blizzard, but that whole month had been building up to the blizzard of, what was it, the 27th of January, I think. So we were already knee-deep in snow stories and snow closings before the blizzard, and in the blizzard we ran the pants off it.
So back then, people communicated by letter and telephone. When did you start getting a reaction about Bellavia? When did it come to your attention?
I would say 3 or 4 days after we started using it, we started getting calls here at the station in the newsroom, people wanting to know, what's that music you're running for school closings? Because that's kind of an interesting piece of music. And it sort of built. By the time that 2-week trial period was over, it was a done deal. We were going to use Bellavia for that year.
So everybody was thrilled with the feedback they were getting.
Oh, certainly.
You especially had to be. Did you realize at the time, based on the feedback you were reading and seeing and hearing, that you had actually created that iconic memory searing event that you were looking for based on your knowledge of psychology?
Well, the fact that we got so many calls so soon indicated to me that we had something that was going to work. And then by the next winter, when we started using it again, the feedback was instantaneous. And it was like a snowball during a blizzard. Everybody knew what Bellavia was. They didn't know the name of it particularly, although we occasionally mentioned Chuck Mangione and Bellavia on the air. Bellavia, incidentally, where it comes from is Chuck Mangione's mother's maiden name was Bellavia. So he had used that name for the name of the composition.
As the ultimate compliment to Jerry, in 2011, NPR, National Public Radio in Washington, did a story on snowfall music, as they called it. And here's a clip from that broadcast in 2011, NPR. The folks at NPR, Jerry, had put out a call for people to say, hey, when it snows, we'd had a lot of snow in 2011. What do you think of? And apparently they had been bombarded from people all over the country now, because they can reach them by email and all that, who said, I grew up in Louisville, or I'm here. You have to include the snow music that WHAS ran.
Yes, I understand that somewhere along the line after I left WHAS, they decided to use different music for school closings. A new news director came in, I guess, and said, I don't like that music.
Well, I'll tell you the background on that. I was here for that debacle. Okay. And it was a debacle. Somebody had decided, I don't know why, whether they were questioning why we were using it. They were all from out of town, and they had come into our newsroom, and they had made that decision. And the blowback from the audience was so strong that they reversed that decision, thankfully. And we were just running it. We were renegading it. When they weren't in the building, we were running Bellavia, whether they liked it or not. And when the one news director left, to your credit and to Bellavia's credit, said, the one thing I've learned is that I'll never mess with Bellavia again. That was brief. It did happen. It was for, I think, maybe a few weeks. It was that quick. But so
well, that just indicates that WHAS has a very loyal audience.
But it's like me. I was one of those kids watching at home when you started
and you became an adult, and
right. And I was seared in because of that very reason. I was looking for my school. I was sort of amazed at all the names I was saying. Some of them were quite funny. I liked the spellings and all that kind of stuff. But once I got my school, I would check out and we'd go out and play. But we heard it so many times that now these people who are writing me, Like Tammy Burns Rice, that song always makes me smile. We knew that song meant a potential snow day. Nothing sounded better than hearing Bellavia being played on the news. I mean, this woman wrote me this message 5 years ago. So the generation has grown up with it.
Certainly that generation grew up in it, and another generation is growing up with it now, apparently.
Mm-hmm. They are. We run it still to this day.
It'll be interesting to see how long it does last.
The whole thinking was, and then sometimes you had so many closings. Didn't Bellavia restart on the air? You'd play it out until it ended, and then
I had to loop it together. I had to loop the last 4 minutes and 15 seconds of it, so it could go on and on and on. It could have run forever.
You think you've heard it a million times?
I've heard it a lot of times.
What kind of feedback did you ever get on Bellavia over the years? Do people know that you how tied you are to that decision?
Well, my wife taught at Ballard High School, and Ballard being a high school was closed like every other school a lot. So the other people on the teaching staff out there started commenting about, boy, Ballard sure closed a lot. And I saw it on WHAS, and they were playing that music that they always play when the school closes are on. And she said, well, my husband had something to do with that. And somewhere along the way, it became Jerry's snow music. And even now, I live 2.5 hours from here, and I get emails every winter, sometimes from people here at WHAS, saying, we heard Jerry's music again. It's snowing, or it's snowing. You remember that music? And so I will ever be remembered, regardless of what I did good at this station. My mantra is always Jerry's snow music.
Well, and you know, I guess I can be honest with our listeners here, and I can tell them that I blame Jerry Lloyd for this. I love snow. I love it, and I talk about it on the air. People write me emails about, get over it, Doug, move to the north, get out here. But somebody has to be a champion for snow in Louisville, because after 78, so much of us hated it. So many people hated it, and we weren't prepared for it. But I think we don't get enough of it, so I love it and cherish it, and it's because of Bellavia. You hooked me when I was a kid, and I'm going to tell those listeners now, here's the man you can send emails to.
And the interesting story about liking snow that you mentioned, I didn't like snow particularly as a kid, but in my 20s, I learned to ice skate, and I sort of like snow. Now, these years later, my son and his family live in Minnesota, and just this past February, they've had like 32 inches of snow, I think, in Minneapolis this year. And I live up in Ohio, and we've had a small amount of snow, but no big deal. And I will comment to Kevin about, well, it's Bellavia time again. And he'll write back and say, big deal. We got 18 inches yesterday, and we're getting 10 more up there. And we got snow up there last winter at Christmas time. And I cracked out my copy of Bellavia, and I was running around the house playing Bellavia for the grandkids. And
I was going to ask you, do you ever listen to it anymore?
Yeah, I hear it occasionally.
Did you ever get tired of it?
No, I don't get tired of it. I still like that genre of music. If somebody comes up with something that's more contemporary now, I realize music tastes change, and the look and the sound of newscasts change, and you got to change with the times.
Our viewers are so into the song that they know. They break it down by the different time and the cuts and its rhythm. Mm-hmm. What was your favorite part of it? Was it when it's really rolling, or the quiet part when it's petering out?
My favorite point is, I believe it's 47 seconds into the cut. The tempo changes, and that's the point at which I like to run. That's my favorite point in the cut. And I always tried to cue it up to that 47 seconds into the start of the cut, because I thought that was the best part of the music. From 47 to about 2.5 minutes in.
When Chuck Mangione came to town and performed at the Palace and other places, he would always play Bellavia.
Oh, certainly.
Did you ever meet him?
I did not meet him. I communicated with him a couple of times.
If you had to sum up that song and what it means, How would you sum it up, Jerry?
Bellavia is a very light, up-tempo. It's a friendly piece of music that can mean whatever you want it to mean. If I had used it over baseball scores in the summertime in a newscast, I suppose you could have made a case for it. I don't think it would have worked for that. But as I mentioned earlier, I wanted something that would relate people to snow and to WHAS. I was very aware of that psychological connection that I wanted to make, because if they liked the music and they were watching us, they would probably stick with us. And that was a big part of what I had to do.
Jerry had a 33-year career at WHAS, 1966 to 1998. So that would be a 32-year career.
32.
Okay, that's why I'm in broadcasting. I don't add very well. But coming up after this, he worked with some of the great personalities in this market ever. Phyllis Knight, Milton Metz, Van Vance, Monica Kaufman, and
Jim Mitchell.
And after this, we're going to talk to Jerry about some of his favorite moments and memories here of such a long career at WHAS, which is actually bigger than Bellavia, in just a moment. Back to Bellavia and former WHAS broadcast director Jerry Lloyd in just a second. But first, I wanted to take a quick break to let you know that Jerry also worked with Van Vance, the great WHAS sports broadcaster who started here in 1952. Van told me about the time Cawood Ledford couldn't call a UK game, and he was told, "You have to do it." Check out Van Vance on Proffitt Report Podcast number 7. And with so many fatal animal attacks in Louisville recently, dead llamas, donkeys, and a cow, find out what happened when a black bear got close to Metro Louisville for the first time in 100 years. Black Bears with the Bernheim Forest Director. It's episode number 4, and it's fascinating. The Proffitt Report Podcast is on the front page of the WHAS11 app, and you can also find it anywhere podcasts can be downloaded. Now, back to Bellavia. So, Jerry, just some of the names of the folks that you worked with here. Mort Krim, Neil Boggs, Ken Rowland. I grew up watching Ken Rowland, Mort Krim, Kirsty Wilde, Chuck Taylor, Dave Conrad, just some of the names there. And
Melissa Forsyth, Monica Kaufman.
Cawood Ledford.
Oh, certainly. The man himself.
What was Cawood like?
Cawood was a legend in his own time. The networks were always trying to hire Cawood away from WHAS because he did racing from Churchill Downs. He did basketball and football for the school 90 miles from here or whatever it is. Everybody knew Cawood Ledford, and it was a real honor to work with him because he was such a likable guy, and he had so many stories about so many people. I loved to go to lunch with Cawood because I always learned something.
Milton Metz told me Cawood was his favorite too, that Milton just loved the guy.
Yeah, the fact that Cawood knew, he didn't just know sports people. He knew politicians. He knew showbiz people. I guess Happy Chandler was a big fan of his.
Did these men and women realize they were big stars at the time? Because back at the time, there were really only 2 major TV stations in Louisville people were watching, and we didn't have the internet. The TV was a growing medium, and it was fascinating and new, and this was it. Everybody was watching.
And the other thing was, it was before ESPN. Now, if you're a sports nut, you've got 40 channels to go to see all the games.
Did they realize they were big stars? How did they act?
Cawood was the most unassuming person. He was a legend in his own time, but he knew everybody. He talked to everybody. He always had time to talk sports.
It was a live TV, so these people, along with you, had to be so quick on your feet because, folks, if you don't know what a director does, a director I describe as the captain of the ship. They've got headsets on. They've got a million sources of video coming in. They're getting us on the air. They're pressing the buttons. They're changing the camera angles. They're bringing in the video. They're putting Bellavia on the air and rolling the school closings at the same time. They're calling for the commands. They're telling the anchors you have 30 seconds. Don't talk longer than 30 seconds. So that is what you're doing. and yet you got to depend on the personality. Who was the best at live TV?
The best at live TV was Jim Mitchell. When Jim Mitchell came here in the mid-'70s, he followed Ken Rowland and Lee Hunter, who had been doing the news before. In the 70s, it was kind of the golden age, I thought, up to that time of news in Louisville for WHAS. And in the 70s, you had Mort Krim, Monica Kaufman was here, you had Neil Boggs, Ken Rowland and Lee, and then Jim Mitchell comes in the mid-'70s, so he had big shoes to fill, and he filled them tremendously. Mort was sort of a showbiz guy who did the news.
And he did editorials.
He did editorials. He had a syndicated segment called One Moment Please that aired on our station and other stations around the country.
He was a big deal. I remember when Mort Krim came to town, my parents really took notice because we had been watching a lot of Wave at the time. Livingston Gilbert and Melissa Forsythe were there. And then when Mort came in, you sort of sat up and went, wow, this is a big-time personality.
Yeah, Mort came in from New York, from ABC Network. He was well-known by any audience ABC had here, and he was a larger-than-life kind of personality. Incidentally, he's supposedly the model for Will Ferrell's Anchorman movie.
That is true. That's a true story. He's sort of laughed about it. And then I had such enormous respect, and the last time I saw you in person was at Ken Rowland's funeral. I had enormous respect for Ken Rowland because as a kid in 1974, that man took us through the most harrowing, terrifying time in this community, and that's the April 3rd, 1974 tornado. Certainly. And I'm a little kid, just got off the school bus, and we get home, watch WHAS, and Ken Rowland's delivery was just the facts, no hysteria.
Absolutely.
But letting you know this tornado's come in your neighborhood.
Yes. And we had the advantage of Ken's calmness in his reporting.
And knowledge of the community.
Certainly knowledge of the community. And so many of the people here at WHAS lived in areas where the tornado hit. I had, at that time, a son who was 4 months old on April 3rd of 74. And I knew what was coming from what was happening here at the station. And I called home. I said, look outside. What do you see? And everybody says, nothing much. And I told her about what was going on. I said, you and Kevin go to the basement because it's coming our way. And it came within a block or so of my house. It came in a block or so of Ken Rowland's house. All of us here at the station had a stake in that tornado. And because of that, we realized the community had a big stake in what was happening because there was an awful lot of destruction that day. There were 27 tornadoes, if memory serves me correctly.
That coverage set WHAS on a trajectory to becoming the most dominant station in television in the market because at the time, Wave had really been the number one in the ratings. And then Ken Rowland told me that was sort of the tide changing. You could sort of feel it in the community. He said, I couldn't go anywhere for years afterwards without somebody bringing up the tornado.
Well, we had two or three things going for us. We had all the people who worked at WHAS TV News, both cameramen and reporters and whatever, producers, blanketing the area. We also had access to a fellow named
Dick Gilbert, who was in the helicopter
for WHAS radio, and we were putting Dick on the air live, and I remember him describing the tornado heading Freedom Hall, and it was great. It was radio, but it was also great television.
But he was the early warning system. He was following the tornado in he was an old Vietnam helicopter pilot. He was tracking the tornado and telling people it's coming this way.
He got low and slow into the tornado. Two things he shouldn't have done.
Radar wasn't
right on top of it. He didn't have radar in the helicopter.
And TV radar wasn't as it is today.
Certainly. On the air, what we had was Ken Rowland. We had Dick Gilbert's reports, and we had reports from everybody who'd been on the scene, and we had to wait for film to be processed. So what we did was put the reporters who had been in these various locations shooting film, coming back, we just put them on a set, and, they were describing that the water company on Frankfurt Avenue has been hit, etc. 30 minutes later, we could put that film on the air, but we couldn't do it at that time. But we had their descriptions, and many of those people were pretty good reporters who really told what was happening, and we started getting a lot of calls in from neighborhoods with all the interesting stories about destruction.
And then flash forward, you get into the 70s. It was about 1976, I think, is when Jim Mitchell arrived.
Yes.
And then they paired him with a co-anchor, Kirsty Wilde from California. That's when sort of the explosion of WHAS occurred. I mean, it just took off after that. They were an amazing team along with Dave Conrad and Chuck Taylor, the team we all watched.
Right. The ratings had been good before that, but when Jim and Kirsty came, it was like they're the ones I want to watch and listen to, because Jim had an authority and a writing style and a camera presence that was second to none. He could have appeared on any station anywhere in the country. And Kirsty comes in from California. She's sort of this California girl, California lady who came in. And the chemistry between the two of them was such that it was very soothing to listen to the two of them together.
Well,
but it was also interesting because they had things to say to each other that were interesting. And
they were in behind the scenes. I can confirm this because that's when I started my internship here. They liked each other. They admired each other.
Sure.
They were good friends. They were friends with Conrad. They were friends even with Chuck Taylor, who was the weather nerd. But people loved Chuck Taylor because he was the weather nerd.
Chuck was a weather nerd. Anytime there was a hurricane anywhere, Chuck had to go to it. He was one of the original people who did the stand-ups at the hurricane in Galveston or someplace.
You were here for Hugo when we sent him to Hugo.
Sure.
in Charleston.
The conversation around it here was, you don't have to go down there to cover it. The network will cover it very, very well. I got to go. I'm a weatherman. This is weather. This is going to affect us all because it's coming in this direction. I got to go. And he always went. And I've discovered that weathermen live and sleep weather. It doesn't matter if you're Chuck Taylor here or Ken Schultz later or Beth Andrews. I mean, those people all lived weather. And I used to shudder when I was producing or directing some of the shows during bad weather time. Chuck would come in and say, I got to have 2 extra minutes to talk about the hurricane that's coming this way. And I would think, yeah, sure, Chuck, 2 minutes. You want 5 minutes. And he would really mess up the timing of the broadcast because we had to hit the network at 6:30 or 11:30, whatever time it was.
You want to know something else, Jerry? It happens to this day.
Oh, I bet it does.
We blame the weathermen and women all the time. They mess up the timing. Of course, I'm guilty of it as well. Well, Jerry, I just want to thank you for coming in. This has been a blast. How can people reach you by email if they'd like to send you a nice note about Bellavia?
They can reach me at j.LLOYD@CINCI.RR.com.
All right. And if you want to reach me, it's dproffitt, Proffitt, at WHAS11.com. Jerry, thanks for creating a legacy now. And it's 41 years. We're still running it. I
hope it continues forever.
Honor. And I talk about you on the air. I let our viewers know every wintertime it comes back around. You know, Bellavia goes away for many months because of the summer. And when it comes back, people will write me, where's that song? Why did it? What's its name? They still ask it that way today.
I'll probably have 2 things on my tombstone when I die. The word Bellavia and fade to black.
Oh, my gosh. Well, what a way to end this edition of the Proffitt Report podcast. Thank you very much for listening.